All right, now it's okay. All right. Our September 21st board meeting for Sedona Fire District is now in session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
We've lost 63 police officers and 20 firefighters in the line of duty, largely from COVID, since our last meeting.
Thank you. Please be seated. That's a lot of it. Okay, Chief, I believe you've got the first item here on the agenda, the presentation of awards and staff recognition.
Yes, so good evening, Mr. Chair and Fire Board and staff. So this evening we get the honor and privilege to recognize one of our employees for 5 years of service. And it is Adam Derringer. He began his Sedona Fire District employment in 2016. We hired him as a firefighter EMT, and then in 2019 he became a certified paramedic. He's received special recognition for an outstanding life-saving care by the Arizona Cardiac Arrest Survivors, and that was in 2017. That's a nonprofit organization. And then in 2018 he received a unit citation for the Secret Slide Rock Rescue. And as we all know, we have some pretty complex rescues up in the canyon, and he participated in those. In terms of education, he completed his AS degree in fire science from Yavapai College here locally. And then also in 2014 in his fire academy, he was valedictorian. Oh. So Adam's one of our up-and-coming leaders, a great firefighter, great contributed to the fire district. So again, we're proud of him, and we're honored to be able to just recognize him for 5 years of service.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And on behalf of the Fire Board, please extend our congratulations toward him, to him, and we look forward to great things from him in the future. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, next up on the agenda is executive session. Possible vote to go in executive session on personal matters pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A1 in regards to the fire chief's evaluation and legal advice pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3 and instructions to attorney pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A4 regarding the same. In addition, vote to go into executive session for legal advice pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3 and instructions to attorney pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A4 regarding fire code enforcement. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, we are now in executive session. Okay. Okay. All right, the board meeting is back in open session. And first of all, to the staff, thank you for being patient. It was an overly long executive session, but we had a lot to cover. With that said, as a result of executive session, I'd like to propose a motion to approve the fire chief's evaluation and to add it into the fire chief's personal file folder. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion's passed. Thank you very much, Chief. It was a great year as we move forward and look forward to next year.
Thank you.
The second item of discussion and possible action for fire code enforcement, that the fire board direct legal to continue to, as discussed, to work with the fire chief in executive session towards the fire code enforcement. And if needed, create an emergency meeting, board meeting, to ensure, when ready, that we can move forward. Okay? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is regular business. Public forum, do we have any speakers from the public?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Our consent agenda consists of the August 17th, 2021 regular meeting minutes and the August 17th, 2021 executive minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. Finance report and updates. Director of Finance, Gabe Boldra.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you have the August financial report in your packet. Starting off revenue, you'll see property tax collection was a little under what we projected. We brought in 13,000, under by 21,009. Non-levy revenues were strong. We brought in 415,000 for the month. Was over budget by 141,000. Really, AMBO is doing really well, twofold. One, I think we're seeing a little higher collection, but we're also still kind of a lot of that back billing from last year when we had the transition from internal to external billing. Wildland revenue was also attributed to that variance of 141,000, made up about 50,000 of that number there. You'll see expenses for the month of August were all, either under budget or closely in line with budget, with the exception of buildings and land. And that variance right there was due to purchase of evaporative coolers for Station 1.
Saw that.
Going on to year-to-date, we're only 2 months into the fiscal year. You'll see our total revenue, we're at $1,183,000. We are over budget by $398,000. Again, ambulance revenue and wildland revenue are the two factors driving that number. Property tax not only is, a little behind from a monthly standpoint, but from a year-to-date standpoint as well. Nothing to be concerned about, just more of a function of timing. We will see the money, the dollars roll in. On the expense side, our total expenses are at $3.4 million, which is $73,000 over budget. You'll see we are under budget in all major categories, with the exception of personnel. That is over budget by $103,000, and that is directly related to wildland deployment wages being over. So obviously we're over on the revenue, but we have the expense for those deployments as well. As far as percentage of expenses, so far we've expended 20% with 80% remaining. As a breakdown of percentages, personnel is our highest at 86%. Followed by communications at 6, operations at 5, and managerial at 3. I like to point out again that 86% for personnel will decrease as we go through the fiscal year. It's very early in the year, so we haven't had a lot of spending on other categories, as well as our personnel costs are inflated earlier in the year because of wildland deployment. So we'll see that number come down as we continue to incur through the normal business of the year. And finally, year-over-year cash position, we ended the month at $10.04 million compared to $8.2 million last year this same time, which is an increase of $1.7 million. Our other assets did increase from 20.8 to 21.6. That's really a function of our investment in capital assets from last year. And then total liabilities decreased from 29.2 to 28.8.
Gabe, I've got a question on this cash position chart.
Yep.
I looked at our cash on hand, and it's reading 10.041.
Right.
And I thought that looked different than it has in the past. And I pulled up the last 3 months prior to this. I went all the way back to June. And in June, we were at 13.5. And it went to 12, it went to 11, and as today, for last month, was 10 million. What do you attribute that drop of 3 million? Is that because we're in that first part of our fiscal budget, waiting for monies to come in from the county, wildland fires, a combination of things?
Right, if you look at the last page of the finance reports, the 12-month cash flow, and you'll see we don't collect really much tax revenue in the first part of the year. You see that fluctuation in our revenue. But you'll notice our expenses remain pretty consistent throughout, and so that's why we see that drawdown on cash until we see our first half of taxes come in, and then it replenishes back up.
So that's what attributes to those combination of things. Okay, thank you.
If there's any questions, that concludes my report.
No, thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you.
That's it for the whole report?
That's it. That's all I
Okay.
got.
All right, I'm glad I got that one in there when I did. Okay, good. All right, was there any follow-up questions for Gabe, from the board? Okay, with that said, I'd like to, make a motion to approve the August 2021 finance report as presented. Do I have a second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the finance report for August 2021 is approved. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is our chief's report. Chief Trotwine, you've got the floor.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Board. So to kick off our fire chief's report, we'll look at a couple of slides of data here. So, when you look at our 2021 monthly incident summary, you can see in August, we had a slight decrease in responses, although when you go over to the right-hand column, you'll see 2021 year-to-date compared to 2020, our calls are up significantly. If you kind of look at how it's broken down, you'll see that on EMS assignments and then the rescue specifically, there's a pretty significant increase there relative to last year. The next slide, responses by station, not a lot of surprises there. You can see it 1, 3, and 4 kind of balanced out when in terms of assisting each other. So, those are our calls in Steel District and also our number of responses total in that first two. So, I would like to move the chief's report to our administration and our Director of Administrative Services, Heidi Robinson.
I think I'm all right. I'll just speak up. Are we good?
Yes.
Yeah? It does. All right. Well, I will have this here. So just a quick update on our, news and events. The RFP for the telecom assessment, we have received responses, we've gone through those with the, committee, the selection committee. We've requested a couple references, and we're in contact, to get those references so that we can move forward and make a decision, and then, work on a timeline through Chief Coyle and through Bob Motes and that department to make sure that it's timed well, that we can give our full attention to that assessment since they will need some of our assistance. The picture at the beginning of the chief's presentation was a picture from our 9/11 Remembrance Celebration. Mr. Soto, thank you for your recommendation and your urging to do a better celebration, a little bit of a bigger celebration at the 20-year anniversary, which we think we did successfully and have, and really enjoyed that interaction with the community for that event. We are going to be coming up on October, which is traditionally Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We have last year ordered some duty shirts for the cruise that has the pink logos on them that are the regular duty shirts for the personnel and their t-shirts. And so you'll see those out in force again during the month of October. So make sure you remark on them so they continue to engage with the community on that. We are starting to plan our annual award celebration. So as we wrap up a calendar year, we'll start doing our nominations for awards, Firefighter of the Year, and so forth. And so we're looking at this year hoping that we can do some kind of an activity to actually have an award ceremony. We've been missing that the last couple of years. And then in conjunction with that, the fire chief and the police chief had discussed last year wanting to do some kind of a collaborative event between the two organizations, and we're going to gear up the discussions on trying to do that as well. So something outdoor, family-friendly, just the collaborations between our departments. So the staffing updates, we are in the middle of our fire marshal recruitment. We have had an overwhelming response. We'll go ahead and place it there, where we had a large number of candidates. We have 8 finalists. We are going to do a preliminary Zoom interview at the end of this week so we can narrow down just our top tier finalists, who then will come and do an assessment center here in Sedona. So we're very excited about the response of qualified candidates that we have for that. Also, the TRT recruitment, that was an internal position, and we did have those final interviews, and we have that candidate in place, and a list for that position, if you will, and they'll be working on that through operations to work that through. Yes, sir?
And TRT is,
It is, technical rescue team.
Technical rescue team,
okay,
the rope and swift water.
gotcha.
Thank you, Ed. And so that is in place, and now all of those internal positions are now done. I'll let Ed update on the training of our new recruits, since that's definitely more in his wheelhouse. We'll finish off, as we usually do, the administration report with the mental health moment, and September is Suicide Awareness Month. So that is something that is near and dear to first responders to be aware, to pay attention to that. It is a far too significant statistic in fire service and just in general. Lots of populations are getting hit with this trauma. And so resources are available. We have resources available through our health insurance and in the community. And sometimes the reminder of the first line of defense to that is your colleagues and friends and neighbors, is to be aware of those changes that happen in someone. Don't ignore them. Don't assume that it's just COVID related, it's just stress, there is no just with it. So be aware, be confident that you can say something, you can ask questions, you can point it out, and get people the help that they need, because it's there. So with that concludes my report. If there are any questions, I'll entertain them at this time.
Just one quick, we're looking to physically have some sort of awards ceremony, like you mentioned, provided criteria is such that we can.
Correct, as long as that is indicated by the circumstances at the time, we are gonna go ahead and plan one. In the past, we've done an awards banquet, which is a fairly formal event, and it was not, the feedback from the floor is that that's not really the type of event that they want to celebrate their awards with. So we wanted to do something a little bit more family-oriented. We do have a large number of our crew is from outside the area, so we want to make sure that it's at a time of day where they could come, and something that they would enjoy doing, since we are in fact celebrating them. So we were thinking something more of a lunch, brunch, something like that, and at a time of year, maybe when we can do it outdoors.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you. Yes.
Yep. So, I'd like to introduce our citizen chief, Jason Coyle. We'll move to the operations section. Chief Coyle.
All right, I gave Terry all this good information I'm about to share with you in the British version, just out of respect for your time. But if there's anything that you would like me to delve deeper into, then I'd be happy to do that. I'm gonna end with COVID, because I anticipate there'll be some questions on that. So, with that, the next thing was talking about significant events. You know, it's kind of same old, same old. There was a number of different motor vehicle and backcountry accidents this year. One of the more significant, actually one of the most significant ones, occurred on August 25th. There was a fatal car versus pedestrian accident on Nisley Bridge, and so that it was something that we responded to, and it also kept traffic and everything tied up for quite some time. And obviously, someone suffered significant loss along with people that knew that person. Some of the other events that occurred were some lightning strike fires. There was a couple MBAs that seemed to time themselves right around structure fires and other large hikeouts. So after the crews got back from one structure fire, then they immediately went on a significant MBA at the canyon. Another time, as soon as they got done with a significant MBA, they ended up going on to an extended hikeout. So it's the way it goes sometimes. It just reminds us about why we want to make sure that everyone stays fit, stays well hydrated, stays ready for those calls, because sometimes, as those of you that have done it before know, they don't spread themselves out very neatly. You know, with the agency provided, Sonoma Fire provided wildland support to fight fires in different communities in Washington, California, Idaho, and Montana during the last month, and not just myself, but other members of our district. Matter of fact, Pat Ojeda, who was working in North Ops, I believe that it was the last assignment he did to get signed up on his division supervisor task book, which is a big milestone and adds value to the organization when we have a large event here to have someone that meets those MWCQ calls. And I'll let Ed talk about the new Can-Ams and as Heidi mentioned, the recruit training. But the coolest call, if I was to rate calls for last month, I think the coolest call was the child that was 30 feet up in the tree, but the dispatch came out because I was on a fire, and I looked out at the phones and it said, child 60 feet up in a tree. Oh, wow, that's a big tree.
It's a big tree.
But the child was safely brought down from the tree. I don't think he necessarily felt like he needed to be rescued, but his family did. So he was brought down to ground level and he was good to go. Looking out at the wildfire season update, there's still significant wildland fire potential anticipated primarily in the northern half of California and in southwest Montana in October, and then the northern half of California into November. Interesting enough, areas of northeastern New Mexico are registering record high indices for this time of the year. So up there in that area north of Santa Fe, and so that will be interesting once hunters get in the woods. If it stays that dry, what's going to happen there? Kind of surprising actually, considering how wet a lot of New Mexico was during this monsoon season. October temperatures, when you look at the climatology, are expected to remain above normal across the west, the exception being the Pacific Northwest. Drought is anticipated to persist across the west through December 31st, with some development in Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and eastern Colorado. So basically the whole western half of the United States is expected to be in some level of drought by December 31st. The Climate Prediction Center forecasts an 80% likelihood of return to La Nina in October to December timeframe. So, those of you that may not remember the ENSO, the sea surface temperatures and the oscillation of sea surface temperatures that naturally occurs when we're in a La Nina pattern, it tends to be a wetter and cooler for the Pacific Northwest, wetter and colder for the northern Rockies, drier for Arizona, drier and warmer for the areas east of Arizona into New Mexico and Texas. So it's not basically for the lower third of the United States. It's not a favorable wintertime pattern. It doesn't necessarily have much influence from the summertime, but when it comes to wintertime precipitation, I think the only good thing to look at the data is that mild La Ninas tend to be less correlated with very warm temperatures and drier conditions than do strong, above 2 degrees difference in temperatures La Ninas. So we'll have to wait and see, but right now it's showing the wrong kind of, the information that we don't want to see as we're coming into the winter. And then, yeah, so that's pretty much it for the significant fire, the wildland fire season update and the outlook. We did, yesterday, I guess one more thing, yesterday we came out of PL5, planning level 5, so it indicates that the most significant amount of resource commitment that requires a national level coordination of incident management teams, lots of other things like that. And on average during PL5, there's 26,000 firefighters deployed every day. So that's our drawdown. That's what we can put in the field. I think hopefully coming from what ended up being a 70-plus day period of being in PL5 was by far the longest amount of time we've ever spent at that, basically all hands on deck kind of level. They will be able to look at that information and decide, like, hey, how do we allocate those resources that were effective, and what are some of the changes we can make to maximize the allocation of the resources in the future. You know, unfortunately, it's probably going to keep happening. I look at 3 out of the last 5 years have been the top 5 in my career as far as busy fire season in the western United States. So it looks like that. I don't know any reason why that trend wouldn't continue. So moving on to GIS, some of the accomplishments with Emily is that with the help of Michelle and Stephanie, they're putting all the materials together in map books, big task map books for every apparatus, every station, things like that. But these are brand new, start to finish, with new quick looks in them, so all the high hazard occupancies and the target hazards, everything with special maps and aerial photographs and everything. It's significant effort, but it's certainly gonna be, an important effort to being able to accomplish our mission. Drug boxes, Emily's been working with Chief Mazulis to develop a mobile check-in system for drug box. I understand, Ed, that you ordered QR code decals to affix to the boxes?
That is correct.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool, so, little QR code with the phones on the engines, and they could scan that, and in real time, show where drug boxes are moved from, things like that, so Emily's been demonstrating her utility in multiple different areas, outside of just the important job of making maps. Another effort that's just beginning is that, Engineer Pace obtained addresses for each county of locations that have basements. And so they're working the coordinates of each one of these into the active 911 system. So for those of you that may not be aware, if you go into what is fundamentally the second level of a home that has a basement, so there's a floor below you, and you think the fire is in the floor that you're entering on, and if the fire is below you, a couple of different things can happen. One is when you think you're hitting where the fire would be, you get no effect. The other thing is that you go over the area where the fire has burned and weakened the floor beneath you, and then you fall into the fire. So knowing where the residences are that have basements, it heightened the index of suspicion of the fact that fire may be in a floor below the floor that the crews enter on. And so just that one piece of knowledge can help them to be a little bit more cautious and could potentially keep them from making, a disastrous decision if they were to decide to keep moving in when they can't locate the seat of the fire, and then end up being over the fire where they fall to the floor. So that's why that is important and useful.
Can I just comment, if you don't
Yes,
mind?
sir?
I have a basement, but it's sprinklered,
Very good.
and so, the folks that, may respond when have you at 145 Casa de Corte Villa can be assured, that particular basement is, definitely sprinklered with several sprinkler heads. Thank you.
Kind of see, so what'll happen there is they'll be aware of that, and then they'll get there, and the fire will be out. And we'll just have to do the rehab. That's happening every time. Rags, all that stuff that would normally end up in a fire that would give us an opportunity to practice all of our skills.
Oh,
It ends up being pretty boring.
definitely. I haven't, none of them have wire hangers hanging from the
Well, that's good.
sprinklers.
So another one of the projects, the last thing to talk about that Emily's working on is we use a product called Collector, and then we use Survey 123, are two different field-based mapping applications. Collector, we make maps in the field with points on the map. We can, if there's a large fire here, we can show where we're gonna break the different divisions, we call it, the areas of people working on the fire. And then Survey 123, basically a form that's geo-referenced, so it tells you what point the data was collected on. And Esri, the company that makes all of our mapping software, is changing to called Field Apps. So Emily is making sure that she's up to speed on that and can make sure that we're all up to speed, because when it's necessary to transition between those two apps, this new app, that will be able to do so seamlessly. So appreciate her taking the lead on that.
Chief, does this also take into account for hillside homes that has an entry on an above floor? In other words, you might be coming in on the second floor. Yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily have a basement, but you would have a full-blown floor, because if you're entering on what looks like a regular single-story home, but it's, the rest of the home's on the backside of
But
it.
if it has a sub anything
Yeah.
from the address side, so if it, like that, if you've got sub one level, then
Right.
it would be, and it would, and
That'd be
and
part of this.
in the system where all they walk out, look out basements, so they would call that a walkout.
Okay.
That's what the terminology that we use on this Brucey system calls it, but it would still show that, that's correct. So telecom, a lot of work's been going on telecom. Bob's working on addressing some firewall issues, addressing system failures between Schnelly Hill and Squaw Peak. Rich has worked on the UTV and ambulance radio installations, and looking to replace the batteries that back up the servers, and preparing for U.S. Forest Service inspection of our radio tower at Mingus Mountain. Jeremy's been working on numerous hardware and software issues. And one of the things that I asked about today, that's been involved in this, but these net motion modems. So, sometimes I wish I should be careful about questions I ask. Fundamentally, it's one thing to have, a cell phone powered device in an apparatus that goes to a tower, and then when you leave that cell phone provider's area, you're out of service for most of the cells. And it's a whole different level of complexity to have multiple different devices that go into basically a modem, a hotspot in the engine or in the ambulance, and that it can collect data and then send it when you get back into service. And so that was what, one of the things that Jeremy, when I was looking at his list of things we're working on, was dealing with Verizon to figure out, and I believe Ed as well, figure out the best way to utilize this net motion application to make it where we could send stuff both in service and then gather it out of service, and the moment when into service is sent. So why that's really important is that we take 12 lead EKGs and we send them to the hospital if somebody's having a cardiac event. And so when the medics work on the cardiac event that is occurring to make sure that they're providing the adequate patient care, and they've already done that 12 lead, and they know that that 12 lead gets to the hospital early, activates the cath lab, and gets everything in place, and increases the likelihood the patient has a good outcome. You don't want to have to keep hitting send again, or like when your text doesn't go through, to sit there and go, retry or whatever. And it was just a good reminder for me about some of the complexities that it takes to be able to accomplish that in a mobile environment in conditions like we have, where there's cliffs and everything else that create some areas that are cell phone denied. So that was the end of that. And then to close out, on the COVID information, so if we look at the state level right now, our R rate is 0.95, so slightly below 1. So that's good. That shows that we are trending down in the number of active cases. The next couple of weeks will tell us how good that is, because we had Labor Day, and we'll think about 2 to 3 weeks after Labor Day before we start seeing the result of more gatherings and everything, and if there's more infections that were secondary to those gatherings and those infections. Maybe that second and third level of effect from that, and then that will, when the numbers will start to be influenced. If we could do better through the end of this month, and then through the first week of October, then that's a positive sign. Across the United States right now, so there are 80,000 active cases in Arizona, slide down in terms over what it was a couple weeks ago. But right now, the total number of active cases in the United States is at or about the peak that it was last winter. So we're going into the winter months, which is where we tend to see, well, not in Arizona as much, but in other areas, people are inside more, and flu, things like that, seasonal diseases tend to ramp up. We don't want to see that now, because we've already got a head start, but we'll see what happens. And Arizona still shows high on the CDC level on transmission map, and so that's about all I want to talk about there. I did just want to quickly touch on the presidential's directive. So, as I imagine most of y'all are aware, that on September 9th, President Biden announced a series of vaccine mandates. It was stated that OSHA is developing standards for, basically to create the backing and help me with the words, but to make those executive orders enforceable. One of the things that happened is there's anchors in Medicare and Medicaid and federal funding that were tied to some of the requirements for compliance. So that will likely touch us. But the chief and I talked quite a bit about this, and everybody actually, and we talked about it at the officers meeting. I just sent an all-staff email kind of explaining the different parts about the COVID environment. But for us right now, so until OSHA issues an emergency temporary standard, until such time that standard is upheld, and there's been 9 of those issued by OSHA, 9 emergency temporary standards, where they basically say that the criticality of the situation is such that they can't go through their normal rulemaking process, and they have to do an emergency temporary standard. I think it's good for 6 months. I believe 4 out of 9 of those have been vacated or partially vacated when the courts looked at it. So, roughly 50-50. But when we find out what that legal requirement is, and if it's upheld, then that will be the time that we decide, all right, well, how do we need to align our actions? If that's So, in my mind right now, it's, educate people on the safety and the effectiveness of vaccines. Make sure that folks are, any questions that we can answer for them are answered for them. But try not to create additional angst or, make any statements about potential consequence or anything like that until we find out what the rest of the landscape looks like, of what the actual emergency temporary standard is. I think, Chief, did I phrase that pretty well? So, don't freak people out, but at the same time, don't be ignorant to the fact that things may change. So, that was the end of my report. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
I just have one quick, do we know the current vaccination rate amongst the crews and staff?
We keep track of everyone that is vaccinated. Chief Mazulis, I believe, can give us the exact number of people that are fully vaccinated as a percentage of our 96 people.
We're just under 60%. Low to mid-50s.
Thank you.
You know, that was the question I asked probably 4 or 5 months ago. You know, how's it look amongst our own district for the membership in vaccination? And it was surprisingly low. Or at least I thought it was surprisingly low. Being in the mid-50s to low 60s, as you just described, is an increase. But still, I feel it's lower than I would expect for a first responder, at least on the sworn side versus the administrative side. Yet nothing's mandatory yet. Do we have a plan to look at it in the effect of if it does become enforceable and our firefighters refuse vaccination, what avenues do we have if in fact if they contract COVID? What do we do then with that?
So there's a lot of different potential issues there. I mean, we gotta see what the law says first, see what the consequence for if we, like say, if it was me and it said, right now the date, 75 days, I think he puts it on November 22nd. So if on November 22nd I'm supposed to be fully vaccinated and I'm not, say I've had my second shot, but I'm 7 days from being fully vaccinated. Right now I don't know what the consequence for the agency would be. I don't understand how hard of a deadline that is. I know I saw some of the federal stuff was like $14,000 a day per person. There were some fines, and I didn't keep that in here because it wasn't relevant to us. But that part of it's scary. That's why right now the vaccines are safe, they're effective, and they have full FDA approval. And so my personal effort is just trying to educate people about the different studies that are out there, the information, and let them know what opportunities for reasonable accommodation, what the criteria is for reasonable accommodation. And in the email that I sent, I put political and philosophical objections are not protected by federal anti-discrimination law. So the best I think I could do personally is educate people right now and try to answer as many questions as we can. Because that's a scary position to think about.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and Chief and I were talking about that. The other agencies, the same thing. To get to a point where 30% of your workforce isn't vaccinated, and there's a mandate that causes the agency to suffer a consequence. We don't align our actions with that mandate.
Well, there's that issue, and then what if they are unvaccinated and they contract the COVID? Are we liable to help them or not help them, or is there medical coverage cover them? Those are the questions that I'm sure have come before you guys as an administration.
There's been talk about, say they were like smokers, if you willingly put yourself in a higher risk category, then what does that mean? I don't know that anybody's figured that out yet, but if I looked at from an insurance actuarial perspective, it's like, hey, if you always speed, your car insurance is gonna cost more. If you get a lot of speeding tickets, because there's a higher risk for whatever, remember Dave Crunch said, you're gonna have a bad day, you're gonna wreck your car, you're gonna hurt somebody else, whatever. So, I can't imagine that wouldn't factor in downstream, although I don't know how, I don't know what the implications would be like monetarily for the district.
Any other questions for Chief? Thank you, Chief Coyle.
Thank you, Chief. Well, and just, I wanna, based on that COVID discussion, I think I wanna do a couple follow-up bullet points. First of all, as you can see, it's a very complex issue. And as you can also see, the staff is taking a very methodical and thorough look at every aspect. So, you bring up good questions, you know, a couple of those areas we're not quite there yet, but it doesn't mean we're not having those discussions and looking at all those implications. And what I do wanna do is back up to when this all happened. So, immediately, what we did is adopt very strict policy and adopt very strict protocols. And without using names, I think definitely in the region, we're a forerunner to that. And so, the question is, why did we do that? Well, it wasn't necessarily because of the unknowns, but there's two reasons we did that. And one reason is because of our mission. So, we believe that we need to stay mission-centric. So, to accomplish that service to this community, we had to adopt a strict policy and strict protocols so that we could keep our workforce healthy so that they can provide the service. So, what we do know, looking back, is we accomplished that mission flawlessly. I'm gonna use the word flawlessly. In other words, we responded to every call, we mitigated every incident, we handled everything thrown at us during this time. So that was one thing, and I would iterate that to the district is, you know, that's where personal sacrifice and choice, well, that's where personal sacrifice kicks in, that's where personal choice kind of goes out the door. We do have a mission here, and we're all sworn to an oath, so we have to maintain that mission at all costs. So, having a strict policy, having strict protocols enabled us to maintain that mission. Second, it's called continuity of operations. So, again, based on that policy, based on those protocols, we maintained our continuity of operations. Again, I'm just looking back right now, why we adopted what we did, and why we did what we did in the district. So what's continuity of operations mean? Well, it means that our staffing remained consistent as we deployed. We did not shut down any apparatus. We didn't shut down a station. We didn't triage calls saying certain calls we're just not going to respond to. We just don't have the workforce to do it right now. Now, when it comes to our mission and our continuity of operations, the actions we took, I think, were legitimate based on the outcomes. So, why would I bring all this up? Not necessarily to criticize other agencies in the region who did not maintain their mission or continuity of operations. And I certainly am glad I can at least answer to the fire board in this community that we did, but it's for this reason. Moving forward from this point on, and we've talked about a few unknowns right now, we are going to maintain that mission. We are going to maintain that continuity of operations. So, if we have to adopt more strict things, we're going to do that, to accomplish those outcomes. Obviously, we have to be compliant with law. Any issue as a public agency that we get into, whether it's federal, state, or local law, we're going to comply with it. We don't really end up with a lot of choices on that realm. We start by, one, comply with the law. Two, if it needs to be challenged for a reason, then you circle back, but you comply first. Again, I wanted to, frame that for the board and the group, remembering where we came from and remembering that we're going to take that same approach. We will maintain the mission, we will maintain continuity of operations, and our decision is based on a lot of data and metrics and information and law. I don't believe that we've made any flippant or haphazard or vicarious decisions here at all. And again, I don't believe that that's the standard in public agencies right now, but I believe we elevate it to a high level to handle what's probably one of the most complex issues that, just being fire-centric, that the fire service has ever had to deal with. One of the most complex issues that the fire service has ever had to deal with. Right. And again, what do you do in those cases? You do exactly what we're doing. You know, we get experts, we study, we look at the law, we make good decisions. And again, my question's always, well, are we carrying out our mission? Yes. Do we have good continuity of operations? Yes. Okay, then it sounds like we're getting the outcome we desire based on this policy, these protocols. So be assured that's our goal moving forward too. You know, and hopefully things won't catch us by surprise because we're paying a lot of attention. So I know that took a minute, but I wanted to camp for a second just to hear how we are thinking as staff. And again, I can confidently tell you what's happened in history, right? We just walk through it. I don't know what's gonna happen in the future, but I know our approach in terms of how we're gonna handle the complexity is gonna be very similar. So I hope that makes sense, or if there's any questions on that.
Any questions for the chief? Was well stated, chief, and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. So, let's, move on in our chief's report, and we're gonna go to our division chief over community risk reduction. Probably in the room, the shortest one on the job here, so John's got a big smile, that's because he loves CRR, not because he's retiring. So, hand it over to Chief Davis.
Good evening, Board, Mr. Chair. Where's it on? I'm not working. Well, I'll just continue. Last month in CRR, we had 176 inspections, did a few more than normal Firewise home assessments. Eric took care of, usually we only hit about 1 or 2 of those a month. He had 4 last month. We did participate in 2 fire investigations. Planned reviews, if you remember last month, I think we were at only 43 plans reviews, and I noted that it was kind of a down month. Well, we're back up to 93 as of last month, so we're right back up where we left off. We did have a couple of notable events. There was a structure fire over on Roadrunner Drive. Ultimately, the cause of that fire was undetermined. We had some possible electrical causes that could not be ruled out, plus there was a workbench in the area where they had been doing some staining, and there was also some possible smoking component to it. So we couldn't rule out any of those with 100% accuracy, so it ended up being undetermined fire. There was a lightning strike up on Schnebley Hill that was visible from town. It was in an inaccessible area, and it was on U.S. Forest Service land, but it did cause quite an uproar on social media because it was very visible from town, so there was a lot of concerned citizens. Ultimately, it burned for a day or two and then burned itself out. I think we got a pretty good rainstorm during that time, which helped it extinguish. We were also able to go over and assist Verde Valley Fire District with fire investigation in their area. And that was our last month. For this month's fire safety message, I'd like to talk to you about clothes dryer safety. You're at a much higher risk of having a fire in your clothes dryer if you don't clean the lint trap, if you don't use a lint trap. So always make sure that the lint trap is in and clean it between every load. Make sure that the venting out the back is connected. It's not, that it's not damaged, crushed, or bent at too extreme of an angle. Always make sure that your outdoor dryer vents open up when the dryer is running. Probably the biggest mistake that I see people make is that they'll say, hey, I'm running to the store, I want to turn off my dryer, I don't want it running while I'm not home, and they go over and they open up the dryer door. there's really only one safe way to turn off your dryer, and that's to let it go through its shutdown cycle. So if you wanna shut it off before you leave, move it to the last 10 minutes or so of the cycle. It just blows air through there, turns off the heating elements. If you open that dryer door when it's at the height of its heat cycle, all those clothes stop bouncing around in there, and they lay right on that hot metal drum, and they can begin to smolder and start a fire. So just remember that if you wanna turn off your dryer before you leave, don't just open the door, let it run through its shutdown cycle. So that is really the only safe way to turn off your dryer. That concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
It looks like that was a complete report.
Thank you.
That's, Helen? Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. Chief Trotwine?
Thank you, Chief Davis. Let's go to, Chief Mazulis, our Division Chief over EMS Fleet and Training.
All right, I'm gonna go bottom up. Training report, as you can see, our crews continue to train on EMS and, ISO and fire training. We've got the new hires going on right now, so we've got a lot of our crew members integrated and coming in there in week 2. So they're doing their extrication training, their medical training, the whole gamut. And, I think we've got a really good new group of folks. We did have some people attend Arizona State Fire School as well, including Chief Trotwine, and all reports was that it was a good school this year. Completed our blue card training, which is how we manage our incident command, and it's reflected in these posters around the room, some of the training that they do. We implemented some enhanced drivers training programs. It's kind of a new module to freshen it up, because our drivers training was, the guys have driven through the same set of cones for a decade, and we wanted to beef up the training a little bit. So we did that, and John Scape, one of our firefighters, has been going around, and he's been key to developing a quarterly mental health module that he goes around and delivers to the crews, and it's been accepted. Guys have been wide open and appreciate his efforts, so that's been good. We've done some stop the bleed training. We had one of our light duty folks work with Sedona PD to do some stop the bleed training integrated within one of their tactical scenarios, so that worked out really well. And we did a stop the bleed training for I'm gonna mess up the good old boys.
The Boys Club?
The Boys Club, yes, sir. I'm sorry, the Boys Club, and that was well attended. And then we had a local resident who works for a fire equipment manufacturer, our outfitter, and he brought a free of charge class to our mechanic and some local agency reps on how to calibrate and how to troubleshoot the Foam Pro mechanism, which is what puts foam into our firefighting water so that it helps put out the fire. So that was a pretty neat opportunity for Mike to get some enhanced training at no cost right here in our base, and so that was a good deal. EMS wise, we're having some fits and starts with equipment. As far as consumables go, the supply chain is as affected as every other supply chain, and so I ordered a little bit more stuff than we normally do to get ahead of it, because I'll get warnings from the manufacturers, hey, gloves are going to be in demand, so I'll order a little extra, things like that. So we've been keeping on it. There's been some delays in getting stuff in, but working on that. Since the last board meeting, we renewed our certificate of necessity, which is what allows us to operate ambulances in the state. And noteworthy is we have CON, our certificate of necessity number 1, first one in the state. It's kind of cool. So that was renewed. It's good for 3 years. Biggest thing EMS-wise we've been working with is our new protocols, which are going good. I talked about that last month, I believe. And then we've had an uptick in Phoenix interfacility transports. So we're kind of evaluating if that's a blip on the radar, if that's a new trend with the hospitals. And then the last thing with EMS is Sedona Emergency Center dropped their level 4 trauma certification. And essentially that allowed them to get, what it meant was they had a fully staffed lab and fully staffed CT and things like that, and they haven't been able to staff at that level, so they voluntarily dropped it with the state. Impact to Sedona Fire is, 150 patients a year may have a different destination, but it's really not impactful to our citizens at all. And I'm not concerned about it. They consulted me back when, and I interviewed back when they got their level 4 with the outside evaluators, and then they consulted with us prior to dropping it, and I indicated I didn't see it as a disruption to our service. Fleet-wise, Mike has got 6 arms, I think. I don't know how he does what he does, but, did get the new battalion rig in service this month, and, so far so good. We got a few brackets to mount, but we didn't want to do it till the BC's got hands on it, and said, no, I wanted it here or there. But, I think it's gonna add capability to our fleet. It gives it a little bit more storage, and, it's a little bit heavier chassis, so that, you know, with payload and things like that, I think it'll be a good truck for them. UTVs were put into service, licensed, registered, and radioed up. We're waiting on some decals. Again, that's a supply chain issue, but they can function without stickers. Don't call them stickers to the people that do decals, because they get upset. And we've already been using it quite a bit, and, they've been a great tool for us. And then, just been, the other big fleet thing is we've been kind of reevaluating our capital plan for fleet purchases, for 2 reasons. One, you know, it needs to be reviewed, and, you know, we've had some changes in fleet needs. And 2, we can't get a lot of vehicles right now. And right now, a fire engine, if you guys, I brought to you and you voted today to buy a fire engine, we wouldn't even entertain delivery for a minimum of 18 months. So, a pickup truck, they're looking to see if they can even get a pickup truck right now. So, that in mind, you know, our American Ambulance Association put out a narrative on how to explain to your governing body why you can't get a new ambulance. That's how serious it's gotten. And, yeah, it was, and so we had a refurb scheduled for this year, and I pushed it to next year. We're in good shape with ambulances, but, manufacturers just can't get parts. And so, to send one of our ambulances that is in service off for a year and a half didn't make sense to me to wait for a chassis. So, that's the bulk of what's been going on. End of report. I'm open for questions.
Question I have for you, you mentioned fleet service mechanic, and you had but one mechanic for quite a while now. Where are we at in that process of filling a vacancy?
Well, we haven't identified a vacancy. We're doing some software changes. I'm having Chris Ahern, who, as you know, was our ambulance billing, and she's taken over more of an administrative assistant role, and it's been huge for us. One of the things we're doing is evaluating the paper side of Mike's job, seeing where we can get some increased efficiencies. And then I've been working with Captain Arwine. We have a product called PS Tracks that manages, when the guys have an issue with a fire truck or an ambulance, they document in the software, and then it kicks Mike a notification, hey, there's a leak on this, or this belt's squeaking. And so working with him, Captain Arwine, we've established that we can add some features to that software where we could help Mike quickly define where he's putting his hours in every day. And then in addition to that, with all our warranty work, it's gotta go to Flagstaff or Phoenix or Prescott. So I'm working on a mechanism to track in a 10-hour day, if he's gotta get an ambulance serviced under warranty, how many hours of that day is spent just getting it there. And, but I wouldn't be prepared to intelligently identify what our needs are. And by that, I think, if I'm reading your question right, you know, would we be benefited with a fully certified fire mechanic, or would we be benefited with a semi-retired guy that could drive our trucks places for us? You know, and I don't think we've identified, I mean, anecdotally, I think C&M Scramble, we could potentially see a need, but right now, I don't know if we've identified what that need looks like. I mean, I don't wanna speak for the chief, but.
Well, Chief, I'll ask you. It seems as though it's a difficult position to have one mechanic that services the number of apparatus that he does, both light and heavy. Yet, based on what you just said, I don't know that we even have a need, or what that need truly is. So, how do you address that? It seems like we've gotten a lot of other positions that were needed.
Sure.
We identified in a hurry what their status was in order to get that position or person. And we've been sitting on one spot in fleet services for a long, long time.
So the 2 components, and I think Chief Masulis brought them up accurately, is one, the PS Tracks. So that tracking mechanism to make it more efficient, so we can get what job he needs to get done instead of him figuring it out. And So I think, we've been working hard at improving that, which I think has created more time for the mechanic to focus on the mechanical thing. And then second to that, that whole restructure where we moved, now we have a functional administrative, generalist or assistant under, the division chief, over support operations, really, EMS training fleet. That component has been pretty huge. So as we get that efficient, where that individual can take that administrative component, where the mechanic doesn't have to do that administrative input. So again, the first goal was, well, let's take the administrative component from him, let's track better. That's first two goals. And then that maps out, and we feel we're efficient there, then we can more accurately analyze, well, is the one mechanic enough? And then again, like Chief Mazulis brought up, sending the mechanic on drive over to Prescott and back, is that effective use of his time? Well, no, because with these rigs, we can have a qualified person drive and back. And I think Chief Mazulis has been pretty creative on who can do that and get that. And so we're trying to leave him with the mechanic work, take some of that administrative work, track it better, and then just craft his time, use it more wise. And I think we've been pretty effective on that. Now, at the end of that game, when we've created those efficiencies, and again, I think we're a long way into those efficiencies, we've created those, and there's still bandwidth, like, we could use some more support. That's when you'll see that recommendation.
And if I may add, in addition to that, kind of out in the ether, there's, with a lot of the new managing chief officers in the Verde Valley, the conversations have upticked on what regional services may look like.
Sure.
And in additional to that, I've had some preliminary conversations with City of Sedona, and there may be some potential partnerships there, and nothing's anything yet, but my point is to just shotgun another person in an already under-equipped shop, doesn't seem like the best move yet without any more supporting data, but at the end of the day, with the desire of the regional agencies and the city to get something moving, in conjunction with maybe a transit plan or something, we may be afforded the opportunity to quickly move towards a place where we have a shared facility that's more practical and in, again, more staff that's not ours that could be cross-shared and things like that, so.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you guys are moving deliberately.
Yeah.
And I won't say slowly, because that's not the right word, but you're identifying those methodically, it's probably the better word. But, thank you. The ability to reassess what all that individual does and becoming more efficient at it, allowing that mechanic to spend his time doing what he's supposed to be doing. But it's those days that I look at vacation, unexpected sick, or family leaves, that what do we do then when we don't have a mechanic, period? So, thank you for
Just to cap a couple, two more things. One, too, was, remember the board approving that, the vehicle that he uses now,
Mhm.
that mobile mechanic unit, that's created a lot of efficiencies again. And again, if he was doing preventative maintenance on an engine, and he goes to that station and does it in the station, it takes 45 minutes, as opposed to, we get that crew into a reserve, he takes the reserve from this point to that point, he gets it into the shop, he does the maintenance, then he takes it back. A 6-hour job that we got down to less than an hour, that kind of efficiency has been huge. And then the other collateral thing, how do you walk it down, how do you analyze it? Well, we're already in the process of updating job descriptions. As we've hired some administrative employees, that was the moment where we made sure they had to be clean and updated because we were posting positions. We've gone back and with the director, with both divisions, with the assistant chief, looked at those job descriptions, and we've completed 3 of them now out of the 5. We added HR to that. And we're gonna work through the IT division, another area where we're looking for roles and responsibilities to be clean, clear, get some efficiency, try to fill that position again that's open there. Well, the approach, again, we're creating efficiencies with that mechanic, but then reevaluating his job description, updating it, make sure the roles, responsibilities, the essential functions fit the district need. And in those assessments, then, with all the efficiencies created, we can do an adequate, okay, well, we need another half position, or, you know, some of the issues like, you know, where do we outsource when he is on vacation, or, you know, he has a family emergency. So trying to pick those up.
Super, thank you. Thank you for your EMS presentation.
I got a comment.
Oh, Chief?
Chief Mizoulas. Down through here, you started from the bottom and worked up. One of us stop the bleed.
Yes.
And I have to, applaud this fire department. And I stopped by and I talked with Heidi, and Heidi took me on a tour of the Stop the Bleed wall-mounted kits and so on. I don't know if that's in all the stations, but nevertheless, Stop the Bleed is as important as CPR. Now it's coupled with CPR training.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken.
In a lot of places.
And for those who happen to be watching tonight, is Stop the Bleed, what have you, is something I personally would encourage them to consider acquiring the training. The materials are available online. If you want the next latest great gadget for your first aid kit, it's a Stop the Bleed kit. Someone who is bleeding arterially will having a bleed out in very short minutes, to the degree where you cannot retrieve them. So, congratulations.
It is a good program, and thank you.
Okay, Chief?
I was just gonna bring up, you know, we're involved with the Wine Fest coming up here. We don't even have a first aid kit, and we just became aware of that a week ago. We have nothing to take care of an emergency on site, so,
911.
911, I guess that's it.
Yeah, and you know, a first aid kit's important, but, like any toolbox, you need somebody who knows how to use the tools.
That's right.
And so, to Mr. McCarthy's point, you know, with the location of the Wine Fest, for example, it's geographically located between two fully staffed fire stations and with good response times, and, ultimately, yeah, having a first aid kit's important, but, we're available and ready.
And that's valid. Another thing we look at when we look at events in the community is if that event is gonna take resources to where normal operational resources end up being committed to the event, then you staff the event. So we have a good history with that event. We look back and look at how much we've responded into it. So, you know, based on the mass gathering, how many people, the complexity of it, what kind of event is it? Like, you know, maybe the mountain bike festival, you can anticipate more significant injuries than the wine fest, but I don't know, you know. So we can look at, but, and, if we look at the past practice, we look at the size, we look at the complexity, how much we're responding, and the on-duty resource comfortably covers it, and it doesn't draw that down, then that's an indication that we probably shouldn't staff it, you know. The reverse, I suppose, would be if Station 1 and 4 end up responding to the event and staying there to manage it. Then it's like, ooh, we're not covering the rest of the district. So when you have that happen based on the complexity, then the next year you go, hey, we're gonna staff it with 2 engines and 2 ambulances, additional. So again, we looked at that, and, I think we've had some pretty good history on that response, so, you know, it's the same thing, you know. If you ask me as a chief, do you wanna put an engine ambulance there? Yeah, I don't care how big is it, sure. Then I would ask the board, well, you guys wanna pay for that? You know, and again, it's back to the efficient, effective, what's the best way to manage that in a really appropriate way. So, we do look at that, but it's good questions.
Back to you, Chief.
Okay, well, let's finish the chief report. You can see this great picture, from our 9/11 event, and, again, that was an excellent event. Our strategic plan, as we continue to update you, we have accomplished that significant update to that. And, so we are grounded in our goals, our strategies, and our action items. Specific things as walk down that plan is breaking down those action items into tasks. And, we've done that, and then it's a matter of, Carrie loads all that in our software. So when the teams work in the different areas, we actually have a tracking mechanism. So, we're getting almost to where we can start tracking again. The initial plan, before we update it, was loaded in that Visio tracking software. Staff got trained and got used to it, and we realized it was time to do an update and improve that. So, strategic plan moving forward as planned. Station 4 construction, as we've said, this is a poor time to do, financing on a construction project. It's a poor time to try to engage a construction company and get materials. So, the latest step we've taken on that, again, is we're engaged the vendor that's gonna do an initial phase 1 feasibility study. And we'll wait for them to reply back, and then we'll get some of that in motion. So, this fiscal year, we wanna continue to slow roll so that we don't create, really an unwarranted cost, you know, to the community and to the district. We've done a great job of preparing for that, but unfortunately, the global pandemic has impacted that very significantly. But as we do as staff, we're gonna take a methodical approach to it. We're gonna get it online, and we're gonna time it where, we make the most of that dollar. Purchase orders, you can see the water heater replacement, Station 1, and then the annual EVCR service agreement. Those are the purchase orders between $10,000 and $50,000. You can see our impact with our social media, and you can see we had, some significant increase in engagement. And, when you finish going through the packet, again, there's some nice, collage of thank you, letters that, I think really are, again, testament to the service we're providing and the job that our firefighters are doing. This period between our last board meeting, we did not receive any donations, but I'm sure we'll have more coming. So that would include the main part of our chief's report. Are there any questions about any of it or any of the last slides?
No questions? I don't think we have any for you.
Thank you, sir.
But thank you for your report for this month. We've got, the next item up on the agenda is the, discussion, possible action, the review of, and approval of the governing board vacancy policy. And Carrie provided us with the red line version of that policy. And we can see that under selection considerations, in blue, number 10 is a courtesy introduction to labor groups, and the fire chief. That previously was not in there, we've had that added. My question to the board on this is, should it be under the selection considerations or underneath the selection process? Do you guys have any input onto that?
I do.
Okay.
I mean, I think particularly because the selection consideration line is, give consideration to the following qualifications. And I don't really see that this is a qualification, it's more a part of the process. So I think we talk about the process under selection process, I would just suggest we move it up there under process rather than have it under the selection considerations.
Okay.
Unless the intention is that interview is in fact, a selection consideration.
Right, and it is more of a meet and greet than anything else, so.
I have to agree with her.
Okay. Al, any comment?
No, it sounds logical.
Janet?
No, it sounds very logical.
Okay. All right, with that said, then, it looks as though then, as it's written here, that it should be moved out of the selection consideration, which is this is number 10, under selection consideration, and moved up to the selection process as number 9. Does that make sense, Carrie? Okay. Bill, is this something that has to be done as in the form of a motion, basically?
Or consensus.
Or a consensus? Well, I think we have a consensus that in moving it up there,
Yeah.
we would all agree on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, with that said, then we do have a consensus to move it up to that other area. And I think that would suffice for what we need to do for tonight. So we have a, general consensus. The next item on the agenda is a discussion for the board members' fire district-related activities since the last board meeting. This is a part, and I'll review it, for Helen, is that whatever we've done in this past month to inform our public, what we've done in relation to working with the fire district. Oftentimes it goes, what work we do with the fire district goes unseen or unnoticed, but in fact, we're pretty busy. So I usually start on one end and go all the way down to the other. So in this case, I'll start with Al. Is there anything that you'd like to discuss?
Well, obviously, I've had some fun taking some social media, especially some of the new equipment, out in the field. It's interesting to see how people react to those things that, and they applaud, the addition of new technology and capacity, and how the idea that a fire truck isn't necessarily the best one to be out on a trail. And I will say also, I've learned something today from discussing the medical center and the emergency room change, because I was in another group last evening, and they were really upset, and they didn't have all the facts that you seem to have a handle on, and they think that they want to declare war, and they don't need to. So.
Okay, thank you. Gene?
Well, I had the pleasure of meeting with the fire chief in a one-on-one, and the future meetings with us are pre-scheduled. That's very helpful to me. And I made a phone call back to him because I was out wandering around my neck of the woods down in the village, visiting an acquaintance there. And I noticed that as I drove into her acreage, large acreage, this is near Las Ramblas in that area down there, so, that the road kept narrowing. It was paved down to about 10 feet. And with overhanging brush on both sides and so on and so forth. Not just light brush, it was limbs. So my pickup truck went through just fine. But I'm thinking of Oakland fire, where people tried to escape on narrow roads with overhanging brush, died in a roadway. And so I mentioned that to the chief and so on. And but the point being is that fire starts on the east side, and some people are notified, some are not, and they're trying to get out at the same time an engine's trying to get in. It's a dangerous area. And I don't know the answer because it's Yavapai County, and those are the roads up there, and that's what it is. So, but I guess awareness is the key. And so those people up there that live there, I don't know that they have a neighborhood watch, or someone to counsel them, what have you. But I did speak to my friend that lives there, and she seemed to agree with me once she saw what the problem is, what have you, and what it could be. So anyway, I appreciate the chief, what have you, accepting my call and his concern and so on. So. Okay. Thank you, Gene. Janet?
I had a one-on-one with the chief. It was very informative. And I've also been reading some information that Chief John Davis gave us to look up about the wetlands interface and...
Wildland urban interface.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I've been reading up on that, and thank you. That was a lot to digest.
Anytime.
And so that's what I've been up to.
Okay. And we'll be discussing the wildland urban interface more in depth next meeting.
Okay, look forward to it.
Perfect. Helen?
Well, I look forward to that conversation as well. So, like everyone else, I had a one-on-one with the chief. And I also had the pleasure of having a really good conversation with Chris Ahern, to talk to her about her members and learn a bit more about the administrative side, of the organization. And besides that, I want to echo a little bit Jean's point. It isn't just down at Los Ramblas. In fact, we had a conversation, I don't think it was with you, but someone I'd called, this is a while back, because we live off of a very narrow strip with multiple homes and tight turns and overhang and stuff like that. And I think it's something interesting to think about for the future projects or community activities or things like that, because I think there's probably more of that around than we think about. So I'm cheering you on, Jean.
Thank you, Helen. All right, thank you, Helen. And lastly, for me, you know, so oftentimes the chief and I are in discussions multiple times during the course of a week on any particular topic. But this week, or this past month, I actually scheduled an hour to sit down with the chief that actually extended into about 2.5 hours. And just going over some of the things that perhaps the rest of the board may talk about that just somehow you and I miss. And so we had a real good talk about those things. We also had the ability to critique the 9/11 memorial. And again, thank you to the entire staff for all their input and help, as well as the police side and all their help. So if you wouldn't mind extending that to the chief over there at the police. A lot of good compliments, a lot of good activities. As with everything, there's always room to improve and adjust. So we've got that down to consider for next year. We also had a meet and greet with labor, and we held it at my house, and it was with Helen. It was a very productive meeting with 3690 and the local, and a lot of good communication there. So, you know, with that said, you know, I continue to work with legal on items that come across and how we best want to present them to the board so that we can have that unified approach. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time to get that done. So it's a busy month, even though it seems like, well, what did we do? So when you really start thinking about it, there's a lot of time we spent together. I even called Gabe's office a couple times on bill pay and how to do things there. So it's always something. None of it's expected. You just take it as it comes. So again, thank you guys all very much for your involvement with the fire district here as a board. And again, thank you for all the work you guys did and administration this past month. So with that said, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Can I use your phone? Yeah. I don't have my call. Check.